The digital counter on the Tehran PRC-77 tactical radio, modified with a KY-57 Vinson encryption module, read 04.17 AM. In the humid, stagnant air of a secure communications room, a sensitive compartmented information facility, SCIF, carved out of the basement of the Israeli embassy in Addis Ababa. Mossad Dani Yatom stared at the device. Its silence was a physical presence, a dense void where a specific, three-pulse digital handshake from Tel Aviv should have arrived precisely at 010 AM. Protocol, drilled into him over 2 decades of clandestine service, was rigid, unforgiving. No handshake was not a delay. It was a negative command. It meant abort. It meant catastrophic failure. Outside, beyond the Kevlar-lined walls and blast-resistant polycarbonate windows of the compound, the city was a powder keg with a rapidly shortening fuse. The American-brokered ceasefire was a piece of paper, a gentleman's agreement between factions who had long abandoned any pretense of being gentlemen. Rebel artillery, likely Soviet-made 120 D-30 howitzers, was now close enough that the reinforced windows would occasionally hum with a deep, chest cavity thrum that was felt as much as heard, a subsonic promise of violence. Yatom's orders, transmitted via a high-speed data burst from Mossad headquarters on the Glilat Junction and personally authorized by Director Shabtai Shavit, were absolute. Await final authorization code, Lek Lecha. Go forth. The biblical command to Abraham. No signal, no movement of assets. But the human intelligence from the network he had spent 4 agonizing years cultivating, a fragile web of paid sources, ideological allies, and blackmailed officials, was screaming the opposite. His prize asset, a colonel in the Ethiopian Army's high command, codenamed Cassiopeia, had sent a runner. The colonel, on the Israeli payroll for 3 years after his wife and daughter were quietly exfiltrated to a kibbutz near Ashkelon, was not prone to panic. He was a professional, a survivor. The runner, a teenage boy who navigated the city's labyrinthine alleys with the spectral ease of a ghost, had slipped through a prearranged gap in the embassy's electrified perimeter fence, a 30-second window between the sweeps of a thermal imaging camera. The message was 4 words in Amharic scrawled on a torn piece of cigarette packet. They are moving now. It was a tactical dagger. It meant the Tigray People's Liberation Front, TPLF columns weren't honoring the ceasefire. They were using the operational quiet to advance their armor and infantry, leapfrogging abandoned government checkpoints to establish new forward positions for the final, coordinated assault on the capital. Yatom looked at the numbers, etched in his brain. He had 14,325 documented Beta Israel refugees packed into every available square foot of the embassy grounds, huddled in courtyards under plastic sheeting, lying on stretchers in makeshift MASH-style clinics, and crammed into processing tents. Thousands more, an unverified number somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000, were waiting in a network of 27 designated safe houses across the city. Their only link to the operation, a cheap shortwave radio, listening for a coded musical phrase from a popular song by Tilahun Gesese that would tell them to move. His orders from Tel Aviv were predicated on a geopolitical reality that the message from Cassiopeia suggested no longer existed. The code, Lek Lecha, would signify that the complex, multi-layered deal was locked. The $35 million wire transfer to a numbered account was confirmed, and Ethiopian air traffic control had formally cleared a block of airspace for an unprecedented stream of Israeli aircraft. But the colonel's warning implied the deal, the money, the airspace. None of it would matter if the runways at Bole International Airport were under rebel artillery fire in the next few hours. The plan, codenamed Operation Solomon, was a feat of logistical engineering built on a foundation of unforgiving precision timing. It was a 36-hour window, from the first landing to the last takeoff. Any significant delay on the front end would cause a catastrophic collapse of the entire timeline. Yatom looked at the silent transmitter, then at the face of the embassy's military attaché, a Sayeret Matkal veteran named Avi. Avi was methodically field stripping and reassembling his Jericho 941 pistol for the third time in 5 minutes. The metallic click-clack of the slide was the only sound in the room, a sharp counterpoint to the low hum of the city's failing power grid. Avi didn't need to say it. He had a stillness that Yatom had only ever seen in elite operators. It was the calm of a man who had made impossible choices before. Yatom's mind flashed back to the briefing on Avi's file. Beirut, 1988. Operation Blue and Brown. Yatom had read the after-action report so many times he could visualize it. Avi's Sayeret Matkal team, inserted by Yasser helicopters onto the Lebanese coast, was tasked with assassinating a senior PLO commander in the heart of the city's southern suburbs, the Dahye. They had been compromised. Their exfiltration route, a series of pre-planned alleyways leading back to the coast, was cut off by a Hezbollah patrol that had stumbled upon their rear guard by sheer chance. Pinned down in a narrow, garbage-strewn alleyway between a bakery and an auto repair shop, with 2 men wounded and ammunition running low. Avi hadn't waited for orders from the command post, orbiting offshore in a SAR 4.5 class missile boat. The plan was dead. He had to improvise or die. He ordered his men to lay down suppressing fire while he and his sergeant sprinted across an exposed street to a parked civilian Peugeot 504. Under a hail of AK-47 fire that stitched a line of holes across the car's trunk, he hot-wired the ignition, the wires sparking in the dim light. He slammed the car in reverse, using it as a rolling shield to get back to the alley entrance. He yelled for his wounded to be loaded into the back seat. Then, with his men firing out the windows, he floored the accelerator, driving the battered Peugeot directly at the Hezbollah position. It wasn't a tactical maneuver. It was an act of brutal, kinetic violence. He punched a hole through their line, the car absorbing dozens of rounds, its windows shattering, and drove his team through the city's chaotic streets, navigating from memory to a secondary emergency extraction point on the coast 3 kilometers away. He had violated the plan to save the mission and its men. He was looking at Yatom with that same expression now. The look of a man who saw the plan failing and was already calculating the necessary violation. They both understood the impossible choice. Violate a direct, explicit order from Mossad command and initiate a mass civilian movement through a city on the verge of all-out war, based on the unverified word of a single, albeit highly reliable, paid source? Or obey the command structure, wait for the signal that might never come, and risk having the entire community annihilated in the crossfire when Addis Ababa became a slaughterhouse. The low hum in the window panes sounded again. Closer, sharper. The 36-hour clock was already ticking, whether Tel Aviv acknowledged it or not. Dani Yatom picked up his own tactical radio, switching to an internal embassy frequency. He had to make a decision that would either be lauded as the salvation of 14,000 lives or condemned as the reckless act that got them all killed. Phase 2. The foundation. The crisis began not with a bang, but with a telex. A dry multi-source intelligence assessment landing on the desk of Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir in January 1991. It synthesized satellite imagery from Amman's Unit 8200, which showed Ethiopian army units abandoning heavy equipment, with signals intelligence, SIGINT, capturing panicked communications between field commanders requesting orders that never came. One specific intercept, from a T-55 tank battalion commander near the Dajan Pass, was particularly damning. "Blue Sky, this is Jackal 3. We have no fuel, no ammunition, and no orders. We are dissolving our position. I repeat, we are dissolving. God help us all." This was layered with the most crucial element: human intelligence, HUMINT, from Yatom's field station. The report detailed the accelerated, systemic collapse of the Derg, the brutal Marxist military junta that had ruled Ethiopia with an iron fist. For years, the exodus of the Beta Israel, Ethiopia's ancient Jewish community, had been a slow, agonizing trickle, a process called family reunification, governed by the transactional whims of dictator Mengistu Haile Mariam. But the assessment made it clear the time for trickles was over. Rebel forces, a coalition of the Tigray People's Liberation Front, TPLF, and the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, EPLF, were no longer a distant insurgency in the northern highlands. They had broken through the Derg's final defensive lines. The thermal imagery of the abandoned tanks was incontrovertible proof. Their heat signatures were fading into the cold mountain air like ghosts. The conclusion was stark. Addis Ababa could fall within weeks, not months. For Shamir, the implications were immediate. The Beta Israel community, concentrated in the Gondar region and in squalid transit camps in the capital, was directly in the path of the converging armies. They were at risk of being caught in the violent power vacuum of a national collapse, of reprisal massacres, of widespread famine. Shamir was a man forged in the crucible of the pre-state underground. As a former operational leader of the Lehi, Stern Gang, he viewed the rescue of Jews as a non-negotiable, foundational principle of the Zionist state, not a policy choice to be debated. His past was a litany of clandestine operations and high-risk decisions made against overwhelming odds. He tasked Mossad and the Foreign Ministry with a simple, almost impossible directive: get them all out. Now, the team assembled for this task was a collection of specialists, each a master of their own dark art. The central figure was Uri Lubrani, a legendary diplomat and intelligence operative. Lubrani had been Israel's last ambassador to Imperial Iran before the fall of the Shah. He possessed a unique understanding of the delicate dance of negotiating with despots on the brink of collapse. His skill was not in grand treaties, but in quiet back-channel conversations, in identifying and exploiting a tyrant's personal needs, be it money, weapons, or an escape route. He was the key that would unlock Mengistu. Working alongside him was Reuven Merhav, the Director General of the Foreign Ministry. Merhav was a rare hybrid, a former high-ranking Mossad Katsa who had seamlessly transitioned to the world of diplomacy. He spoke the language of both spies and ambassadors, allowing him to translate Lubrani's clandestine deals into a bureaucratic framework the government could officially, if quietly, approve. His pioneering work in establishing the very first channels to the Beta Israel community in the 1970s gave him an unparalleled, granular understanding of the human terrain. The operational architect was Mossad Director Shabtai Shavit. Unlike his more flamboyant predecessors, Shavit was a quiet, analytical spy master. A product of Sayeret Matkal, he was pathologically risk-averse, a probabilistic thinker who measured every decision against the potential for catastrophic failure. He distrusted politicians' grand promises and demanded concrete, verifiable intelligence before committing assets. His job was to build the operational machine on the ground in Ethiopia, the agents, the safe houses, the communication lines, the escape routes, and to ensure it could function amidst the chaos of a collapsing state. He was the brake, the voice of caution, constantly demanding contingency plans for contingencies. The military component fell to Major General Amnon Lipkin-Shahak, the IDF's Deputy Chief of Staff. A decorated war hero and future Chief of Staff, Lipkin-Shahak was the master of logistics on a global scale. While Lubrani negotiated for access, Lipkin-Shahak had to solve the physical problem: how to move an entire community, the size of a small Israeli city, in a matter of hours. He dealt in fuel tonnage, runway load-bearing capacity, aircraft turnaround times, and the deployment of the necessary security forces, including elite commandos from the Shaldag, Kingfisher, and Sayeret Matkal units, to secure the airport perimeter. His canvas was global, sourcing transport aircraft and coordinating flight paths across the Red Sea, all while maintaining absolute operational security. These four men, the diplomat, the spy-turned-bureaucrat, the spy master, and the general, formed the core of the planning committee. They were balanced by the fifth, most unpredictable player, Mengistu Haile Mariam. The Ethiopian dictator was not a rational actor. He was a paranoid, brutal leader responsible for the Red Terror, a campaign of murder and torture that had killed up to 500,000 of his own people. By 1991, he was a cornered animal. The Soviet Union's collapse meant his supply of arms and economic aid had vanished. The TPLF and EPLF rebels, once dismissed as provincial gangs, now controlled over 80% of the country. His army was defecting in division-sized units. Mengistu's only remaining assets were the people within his shrinking borders. He had long used the Beta Israel as a bargaining chip, allowing a few hundred to leave in exchange for Israeli military aid, particularly cluster bombs and technical advisors. Now, with his regime on the brink of annihilation, he saw them as his final lottery ticket. The entire Israeli plan depended on Lubrani's ability to precisely calculate and meet the price of this desperate dictator's final act. The chessboard was not just Ethiopia. It was a complex geopolitical map defined by the end of the Cold War. For decades, the Beta Israel had been trapped, their claims of Jewish heritage debated by Israeli rabbinical authorities and their existence used as a pawn by Ethiopia's rulers. A 1973 halakhic ruling by Israel's Sephardic chief, Rabbi Ovadiah Yosef, had affirmed their Jewishness, officially opening the door for their aliyah under the right of return. But the Derg regime, after overthrowing Emperor Haile Selassie in 1974, severed ties with Israel, slamming that door shut. The situation festered until the mid-1980s. A devastating famine created a refugee crisis, pushing thousands of Beta Israel across the border into Sudan. This created the opportunity for Operation Moses. Between November 1984 and January 1985, Mossad, working with the CIA and Sudanese security officials who had been heavily bribed, secretly airlifted around 8,000 Ethiopian Jews from refugee camps in Sudan to Israel. The operation was a masterpiece of clandestine logistics, using a Belgian charter airline, Trans-European Airways, as a commercial front. But it ended in disaster. A junior minister in the Israeli government, seeking to score political points, leaked the story to the press. The public revelation caused outrage in the Arab world, forcing a furious Sudan to halt the operation immediately. 4,000 people were left behind in the camps. A smaller follow-up operation, Operation Joshua, led by the U.S. Air Force, rescued another 500 people a few months later. But the primary route through Sudan was now permanently sealed. This failure became the foundational lesson for Operation Solomon. Secrecy was not just a preference. It was the paramount requirement. And relying on a third country like Sudan was a fatal weakness. The next operation would have to be a direct extraction from the capital of Ethiopia itself. The geopolitical landscape was further complicated by the concurrent activities of other intelligence agencies, creating a hazardous operational environment. The CIA's station in Addis was working overtime, not on rescue missions, but on trying to broker a soft landing, a negotiated transfer of power to the TPLF that would prevent a total state collapse and the creation of a vacuum that could be filled by more radical elements. Their heavy electronic surveillance footprint and numerous meetings with both government and rebel figures created significant background noise, forcing Mossad's SIGINT teams to constantly filter out American activity from legitimate threats. In one particularly close call, a Mossad Katsa operating under diplomatic cover was scheduled to make a dead drop to Cassiopeia in the Mercado, Africa's largest open-air market. The signal was a chalk mark on a specific vendor's stall. Just as the Katsa approached, he saw two men he recognized from surveillance photos as CIA case officers making a brush pass with a TPLF political officer less than 20 meters away. The Katsa had to abort, delaying the receipt of critical intelligence by 24 hours. Meanwhile, the French DGSE was running its own operation out of neighboring Djibouti, focused on evacuating French nationals and protecting their interests in the strategic Horn of Africa, primarily the Djibouti-Ethiopia Railway. On two separate occasions, Mossad surveillance teams shadowing Ethiopian officials had to abort their missions when their targets entered meetings with DGSE agents, creating a high risk of blue-on-blue compromise. Adding to the chaos were the remnants of the KGB, now reorganizing into the SVR. Their Addis Ababa residentura was in burn mode, frantically destroying decades of files and exfiltrating their most sensitive Ethiopian assets before the government fell. Their unpredictable movements and use of old Cold War safe houses, some of which were in the same neighborhoods as Mossad's, created an additional layer of counter-surveillance complexity for Yatom's team. This crowded, contested intelligence space meant they had to operate with extreme precision, like surgeons in a dark, crowded room, knowing a single slip could have international consequences. The direct trigger for the operation was the fall of the city of Ambo, just 125 kilometers west of Addis Ababa, on April 25, 1991. This was followed by SIGINT confirming that the massive Dejan Debre Marcos government force, the last significant army group defending the capital's approaches, had disintegrated without a fight. The road to Addis was now effectively open. The window of opportunity, once thought to be months, had shrunk to weeks, perhaps even days. The diplomatic track went into overdrive. The United States dispatched former Senator Rudy Boschwitz as a special envoy. This American involvement was the perfect diplomatic cover. Uri Lubrani and his team attached themselves to the American effort, presenting their objective as a humanitarian sidebar to the main political negotiation. Lubrani met with Mengistu in the dictator's fortified palace, a room where the lingering smell of stale tobacco and disinfectant failed to mask the scent of fear. The negotiations were a high-stakes poker game. Mengistu demanded a staggering sum, initially rumored to be as high as $100 million. He wanted advanced weaponry, including cluster bombs, to use against the rebels. Lubrani, backed by American pressure, calmly countered. He explained that no amount of weaponry could save the regime now. The only thing for sale was a future, a safe exit for Mengistu and his immediate family, and a substantial relocation fee for him to live comfortably in exile in Zimbabwe. The figure they settled on was $35 million. The money was sourced from a global network of Jewish federations and donors, a massive fundraising effort conducted in absolute secrecy. The funds were transferred via a correspondent bank in Geneva to a specific numbered account at the New York branch of the Ethiopian Commercial Bank, structured to be reversible. The agreement was simple. The moment the first Israeli plane was cleared to land, the funds would be released. But Mengistu, paranoid to the last, held back. It was then that a critical piece of signals intelligence landed on Shabtai Shavitz's desk. Mossad had intercepted and decrypted a high-frequency radio communication between two TPLF field commanders. They were planning their final push, coordinating a multi-pronged assault on Addis Ababa to begin in the last week of May. Crucially, their first operational objective was Bole International Airport. They intended to seize it to prevent Mengistu and his cronies from escaping. This intelligence transformed the operation's timeline from urgent to critical. The planes had to get in and out before that final assault began. The 36-hour time frame was not an arbitrary number. It was the last possible window of stability before the airport became a battlefield. This was the information that forced Yitzhak Shamir's hand. He gave the order to execute, even without Mengistu's final, formal approval. The risk of waiting was now greater than the risk of acting. The code Lech Lecha was prepared. The machine began to move. Phase 3. The core. The activation order, a simple two-word transmission, rippled outwards from the IDF's command bunker, the pit, at Kiryat headquarters in Tel Aviv. For the Israeli Air Force, it meant launching a fleet into non-hostile but unstable airspace, with no formal landing rights confirmed. The first wave consisted of unmarked C-130 Hercules transport planes from Nevatim Air Base. Their mission was twofold: deliver the advance force of Shaldag and Sayeret Matkal commandos to secure the Israeli-controlled sector of Bole Airport, and, more importantly, to serve as a canary in the coal mine. If they were fired upon by government anti-aircraft batteries or denied landing, the entire operation would be aborted. The planes flew a circuitous route over the Red Sea, their transponders off, maintaining strict radio silence until they entered Ethiopian airspace. The pilots had flight plans that listed their destination as Nairobi, a digital fiction to deceive regional air traffic control. On the ground in Addis Ababa, Dani Yatom's decision to act on Cassiopeia's intelligence, moments before the official signal arrived, proved prescient. He initiated the ground plan, the consolidation. Before the main movement, however, a critical preliminary step was required: a final, high-risk surveillance run of the primary route from the embassy to Bole Airport. 2 hours before Yatom made his fateful decision, the three-man Kaidan team, led by Avi, had slipped out of the embassy in a battered Toyota Land Cruiser. Their mission was to conduct a ghost run, driving the exact route the buses would take, mapping every government checkpoint, every potential ambush site, and using a laser rangefinder to confirm fields of fire for potential rebel artillery. 10 minutes into the run, it almost ended in disaster. As they approached a major intersection near Meskel Square, a military roadblock that wasn't on their latest intelligence briefing materialized out of the pre-dawn gloom. It wasn't a standard checkpoint of bored soldiers looking for bribes. This was a unit of the Ethiopian Internal Security Service, the EISS, Mengistu's political secret police. They were alert, paranoid, and actively hunting for foreign agents trying to flee or influence the outcome of the collapse. Their BTR-60 armored personnel carrier blocked the road, its 14.5 mm KPV heavy machine gun pointed casually in their direction. Avi slowed the Toyota, his hand moving casually towards the suppressed Glock 19 tucked in his waistband. The officer in charge, a captain with the dead-eyed stare of a professional interrogator, strode towards them, his Makarov pistol in a low-slung holster. He demanded their papers in clipped, formal Amharic. The team's cover was as civilian employees of an Italian agricultural firm. Their forged documents were perfect, but they wouldn't stand up to scrutiny from an EISS officer. As the captain examined Avi's papers under a flashlight, his beam swept over a Pelican case in the back containing their encrypted communications gear. "Open it," he snapped. Before Avi could answer, the team's comms specialist, a young tech genius named Erez, leaned forward. In flawless, locally accented Amharic, he explained it was sensitive geological survey equipment for a well-digging project sponsored by the Ministry of Agriculture. He name-dropped a deputy minister whom Mossad knew was a distant cousin of the captain's commanding general. It was a calculated gamble, a piece of micro-intelligence planted for just such an eventuality. The captain was unimpressed. "I have heard many stories, Italian. Open the case." This was the precipice. Opening the case would mean a firefight. Avi's mind raced. He saw the 2 soldiers on the BTR-60, the 4 others flanking the captain. His team had 3 suppressed Glocks and 2 micro-Uzis. They could win, but the gunfire, even suppressed, would bring the entire city down on them. As the captain reached for the case latch, the 3rd team member, Mir, sitting in the passenger seat, began to cough violently. A deep, racking spasm. He doubled over, gasping for air. The captain recoiled instinctively. Mir, a seasoned field medic, spat a thick gob of reddish fluid, a mix of saliva and a concealed blood capsule, onto the dusty asphalt. "Cholera," he gasped in Amharic between coughs. "He has cholera. We are taking him to the clinic." Panic flashed in the captain's eyes, overriding his suspicion. The Red Terror had been brutal, but disease was indiscriminate. Fear of a cholera outbreak was rampant in the city. He took 2 steps back from the vehicle, waving his hand in disgust. "Go! Get out of here! Go!" He wanted nothing to do with them. They drove us and their hearts pounding. The ghost run had confirmed the route, but it had also revealed how fragile their control over the situation was. One unlucky encounter, one officer who was more paranoid than he was germophobic, and the entire operation would be compromised. Securing the logistics for the move was its own covert operation. The fleet of over 50 buses was provided by the Anbessa City Bus Service Enterprise. 2 weeks earlier, a Mossad Katsa posing as a representative of a Swiss NGO had approached the company's general manager. The initial offer was a generous cash payment. The manager, a shrewd apparatchik, had tried to extort a higher price. The next day, he received a plain envelope containing a single photograph, a picture of him meeting with a known TPLF sympathizer, taken by a Mossad surveillance team a year earlier. The message was clear. The manager's cooperation was now guaranteed, and at the original price. Each bus had an Israeli agent on board, armed with a concealed Glock and a radio, and a local Ethiopian fixer to handle the low-level shakedowns from soldiers at checkpoints. Yatom, receiving Avi's terse, coded report. "The road is clear, but has teeth," gave the order. Mossad agents and Jewish agency workers fanned out across the city. The signal was a phrase whispered by a trusted local contact. "The water is ready for the journey." This activated the community's internal leadership, who began moving families to larger collection areas. The initial phase was immediately beset by chaos. The news exploded through the community like wildfire. Thousands who were not on the initial lists began walking towards the embassy on their own. The orderly processing plan collapsed under the sheer weight of humanity. The embassy grounds became a sea of people. The agents abandoned the lists. The new rule was simple. If you were here, you were going. The diplomatic front was equally fraught. Uri Lubrani was in a final tense meeting with the acting head of state, Tesfaye Gebre Kidan. Mengistu had fled just 2 days prior, on May 21st. Kidan, initially cooperative, was now wavering. Generals were demanding the Israelis be stopped. One general, the commander of the airport security garrison, made a direct threat. His men would block the runway with 2 BTR-60s unless he received a personal payment of $1 million in cash. While Lubrani tried to calm the Ethiopian leadership, a Kaidan team was dispatched with a briefcase containing the cash. Non-sequential, used $100 bills. The handover took place in a dimly lit maintenance shed. The entire multi-million-dollar state-level operation was nearly scuttled by the greed of one man. A problem solved not with diplomacy, but with a bag of money. Technology was both the enabler and a constant source of tension. The backbone of the airlift was El Al's fleet of Boeing 747s. To maximize capacity, they underwent a radical modification. Seats, galleys, and even interior cabin paneling were removed. Engineers from Israel Aerospace Industries recalculated the plane's weight and balance parameters using KTIA design software. Their models were theoretical. No one had ever attempted to fly a 747 with over 1,000 standing passengers. The IDF's C-130 Hercules fleet played a different role. Their ability to operate from damaged runways was a critical contingency. They were also equipped with military-grade countermeasures, flares and chaff dispensers, to defeat shoulder-fired SA-7 anti-aircraft missiles, which intelligence suggested the rebels possessed. Just as the first buses were preparing to leave the embassy, the operation's high-tech heart failed. The primary communication system, a portable L-band satellite terminal providing an encrypted link to Tel Aviv, suddenly went dead. An error code flashed on the screen. TXRX alignment fault. The signal was gone. A solar flare, or perhaps deliberate jamming, had knocked it out. Panic flickered in the SIF. Without that link, Yatom was blind, and Tel Aviv was deaf. The engineers in the pit tried to talk Erez through a remote reboot and realignment.